Hey, how's it going? This is week 2 of me watching and discussing every fall 2023 anime. In this video I will be talking about every episode released between October 2nd and October 8th. There are a lot of episodes released this week, 45 of them to be exact, so let's get into them. There are many new seasons of old shows that have started this week, many of which I won't be watching due to having dropped their prior seasons. I'm going to start by getting these out of the way real quick by briefly talking about my experiences with them. Kage no Jitsuryokusha ni Naritakute. I only watched the first episode of this show's first season. It just felt like any other obnoxious isekai to me. In later times I've come to understand that this was meant to be some sort of parody or commentary on isekai, but this clearly flew way over my head. If your parody is too close to the thing you're making fun of, is it really a parody? Maybe I was just totally blind to the genius of this show, but I completely missed it, so I won't be watching this. Tokyo Revengers, Tenjiku-hen. I finished all of the first season of this show and I liked certain aspects of it, but way too many things felt childish and absurd to me. Especially the main character just actually pisses me off. He's such an annoying dweeb and I could barely stand seeing him scream and cry over every little thing that would ever happen. I also felt that the show went way too hard with much of its drama and a lot of it felt unearned or forced. Some of the other characters were a bit more compelling, but in the end I'm probably just not quite the target audience for this one. Cool dudes isn't really my jam. I'm more a cute girls kinda guy. Saihate no Paladin, Tetsusabi no Yama no O. I dropped this show at the first episode of its first season and I barely remember it, but just looking at its promo art puts me off, so I guess I could see why I wouldn't really be into what the show had to offer. My anime list says it has isekai and reincarnation themes, so that probably never did bode well for me. Mahoutsukai no Yome, Season 2, Part 2. I remember watching some 3-part series of this ages ago, back when it was just some OVA thingy, and not the full series. I remember being quite engaged by the cool visuals and the mysterious setting back then, and appreciating it a fair bit. I was hence a bit excited when it was eventually made into a proper series, but as this first season was going on, I felt my interest wane. Many characters ended up being introduced that I found annoying and embarrassing, and the core cast eventually appealed to me much less than they had at the start. I finished the first season, but after that I was totally checked out from this series. Nanatsu no Taizai, Mokushiroku no Yonkishi. Oh man, I can confidently say that Nanatsu no Taizai is the worst shonen that I've ever had the displeasure of watching. My significant other wanted to watch the first season of this with me as she found it on Netflix many years ago, so I figured I might as well sit through it out of respect for her having taken the initiative to ask. But I sure wish I had just dropped it at the first episode and saved myself the agony. We ended up watching it all the way into the middle of the Kamigami no Gekirin season, but then we finally gave up on it. I can barely imagine a more tasteless or trite action fantasy than this, and I have no intention of ever catching up with it. B Projecto, Netsuretsu Love Call. Oh boy, I do vaguely remember this show as making me completely baffled by what was going on. It's a male idol show and let me tell you, these go absolutely hog wild into being just utterly absurd in regards to the music and the character designs. This was the first show of its kind that I ever watched, so it was quite the experience back then. I guess I'm not part of the female demographic that this is meant for, but are there really women out there who's into these kind of dudes? I guess I shouldn't be so narrow-minded, but this was certainly quite out there. I only watched the first episode of this series' first season and that was more than enough for me. Musume Pretty Derby, Season 3. This is another show where I only watched the first episode, and here a part of me regrets I didn't keep up with it. This franchise seems to have become pretty well established in Japan, and I sometimes feel it's a shame that it didn't stay in the loop. I guess most of this presence comes from the game rather than its anime adaptations though, so maybe it doesn't make a difference. The show does at least feature some cute girls and stuff, so it wasn't completely outside of my comfort zone. But that one episode that I watched sure didn't motivate me to watch anymore, so here we are I guess. Not going back for it now. Tate no Yuusha no Nariagari, Season 3. Watched the first episode of this too, but then no more. This is another case where I sort of regret it, as this show ended up being pretty huge. I usually do try to keep up with at least all the most popular stuff, even if I hate the shows, because I want to stay aware of where the industry is going and what productions that manage to garner the most success. But when this first episode aired, I just felt that it was like any other isekai, with annoying game mechanics that I thought felt unnatural and weirdly implemented. I wasn't captured by any of the characters or the setting, so I felt no interest in watching any more of it. While I sort of wish I had watched it to have some more insight into what everyone else likes about it, there's too much of it to go through now at this point, so I don't think I'll be doing it. I also want to mention that the fact that Kevin Penkin is doing the soundtrack for this show really does make me feel that I've missed out on something special. His soundtrack for Made in Abyss is an absolute masterpiece, and one of the best in the entire history of anime, if you ask me. Arknights. Fuyukomori Kaerimichi. I watched the first episode of the first season of this, and while I was a bit surprised by the quality of its visuals, the actual narrative substance felt completely irrelevant to me. I feel that this is very often the case with phone game adaptations to anime, and I didn't feel like this was any exception. To someone who has played the game, I'm sure it's a rewarding experience to see one's favorite characters act out the story on screen, but I didn't have that background, so the show only had its own strengths to stand on, and for me, this wasn't enough to keep me invested. Maybe this was only made to appeal specifically to players of the game, and maybe it even relied on prior story knowledge from having played it. Who knows? Either way, I wasn't fond of the little that I saw. Fooly Shoegaze. Oh man. I absolutely adore the original Fooly from the year 2000, but I've heard so much utterly bizarre stuff in regards to this reboot or whatever that seems to be going on. I always did intend to watch it once it all started, but it somehow slipped through the cracks for me. Maybe I was preoccupied with something else back when Fooly Progressive first released in 2018, as I never ended up getting around to it. I've heard it be called one of the worst sequels ever made though. I certainly haven't heard great praise for where this franchise has been taken. This is something that I do fully intend to catch up with at some point though, as I really do like the original. But this won't be happening anytime soon. There's way too much stuff airing this season. Rail Romanesque 2. Yeah, I think I've seen some of this. I've marked down having seen the first episode on Mal, but I remember basically nothing about whatever I may have seen. This show has a rating of 5.15 on my anime list, so maybe I'm not forgetting too much here. The promo art honestly looks hella cute, but I guess that wouldn't really carry the show if all its characters make you want to bash your head against a wall, which is maybe why I've forgotten this completely. Might also be the short episode length of 3 minutes each. Kizuna no Allele. Allele? Season 2. Ooh, this is actually a sort of recent thing. The first season aired and even ended just a short while ago, no? Whatever the case, I found it to be an absolute train wreck. It was damn near incomprehensible and the furthest thing from entertaining. I do remember the good old days where I'd watch Kizuna Ai on YouTube and seeing her play Limbo and stuff, but this sure ain't reminiscent of any positive feelings like that. The Idolmaster Million Live. I was quite fond of Love Live back in the day, and I gave the first Idolmaster anime a try back in 2019. But even though I really wanted to like it, as I loved a lot of its character designs, I couldn't make it more than 6 episodes in without being bored and annoyed. I disliked many of the character interactions and I thought a lot of the dialogue was dumb and frustrating. I don't know how the other seasons or other Idolmaster shows compared to the original, but I've never really felt too motivated to find out, and that isn't changing today. Kibou no Shikara, Otona Precure 23. This is the first sequel that is currently airing that I haven't seen anything of at all. I've heard plenty of mentions about Precure overall, and I understand that it's a Mahou shoujo show that's aimed towards a younger audience. Since it seems to have such a strong presence, I do think I'd want to watch at least a bit of it and get the feel for what it's all like. But I honestly wouldn't even know where to start. There's like 100 different Precure shows on my anime list. Maybe someday, but not today. And that's it. I think we've sorted through all the sequels that won't be along for this ride. Let's get into the rest of the shows. There are a lot of them. Keiken Sumi no Kimi to Keiken Zero no Ore ga Otsukiai suru hanashi, or Kimizero, Episode 1. So this show opens with a Gyaru inviting a nerdy loser to have sex with her. I might just be exactly the target audience for this show. Seems the show skips back to the past after this intro though, so I guess this is a rom-com where these two unlikely partners will eventually end up together. I can maybe get behind that. In the end, this episode ended up being a kind of silly wish fulfillment fantasy, but even so I ended up getting completely hooked. This show appeals to some really pinpoint preferences in me, and it ended up being absurdly effective. There's a fair few things that I think it does really right that many other similar shows fail spectacularly at. And the first and most important part of this is that the main guy is an appropriate amount of horny. A great deal of rom-com shows that feature assertive female leads have main guys that are seemingly completely asexual, featuring dudes who think holding hands is a grave sin and the apex of naughty or intimate activities, or dudes who look away in panic at the first sight of some skin on a girl, and who would never take the initiative for sex. I understand that this appeals to a certain ideal or fantasy some people have, that the guy is just this nice and innocent person who values the feelings of the relationship over anything physical. But I mean, the physical part is kind of nice too, so why not do both? Having only the physical portion is obviously questionable, but it's easy enough to do both, so just do that maybe. This show starts off with main guy seeming like another one of these losers, but when faced with the opportunities he actually does have a much more realistic and relatable mindset. He and Igeru do end up as a couple already in this first episode, and just later that same day, she invites him for sex. In most cases like this, the male party would obviously violently decline here and run away, but this is one of the few cases where this is actually the reasonable course of action, since they literally only just learned each other's names the same day. An important distinction is that the main guy simply says maybe not right now, with the intention of getting to that point once they've gotten to know each other better, which is obviously the best course of action in this situation. Accepting this invitation for sex would be taking advantage of this girl's fucked up disposition in regards to what it means to be in a relationship. She later explains that she thought offering herself up was some sort of duty she had in a relationship so that the guy wouldn't run away to some other girl, and that sex was what a relationship was all about. Which is obviously outrageously concerning, and I feel bad for the shit she must have been through to end up at this mindset. I'm really intrigued to see where this relationship leads, as I suddenly really want to see her get the benefits of a more healthy relationship. All of this is obviously way too convenient though. One of the hottest girls in school just happens to be messed up enough in the head to accept a confession from some random loser she doesn't know. And if she doesn't get anything out of having sex or being in a relationship, then why does she accept invitations to be in a relationship? One would think this kind of treatment would eventually cause her to lose interest in romance, but whatever. Maybe this will be developed upon later. Either way, I don't mind this unrealistic aspect. I can relate a lot to this main guy. I was basically the same dude 6 years ago. I also probably wouldn't just accept a willy-nilly invitation for sex even though I'd really want to. So I feel like he has the perfect amount of horniness. He's a decent guy who acknowledges his urges but keeps them in check out of respect for the other party. This is surely how it should be. There's one thing that I felt was a bit wasted with this episode, and that is the lead up to this sex invitation. The show opens with this scene pretty quickly, likely to make viewers latch on already at the start of the episode and want to see how we'll end up here. But the fact that we know that it's coming this early ruins a bit of its impact when it actually happens. The additional context does elevate it, but this scene at the end of the episode would hit much harder if we weren't already expecting it. But anyway, this is mostly a small thing. Overall, I was really fond of this episode and I'm excited to see where this goes. Cute show. Also, main girl is fucking mega adorable. I really like her design. Definitely watching more of this one. 16-bit sensation, another layer. Episode 1. Well, I am instantly hooked by this show. Koga Aoi is back at it again by being a mega cute anime girl, but this time in one of my favorite settings, supernatural Japan. And even more better, Akihabara specifically. I actually visited Japan in May of this year and spent a decent chunk of my time just roaming around in Akihabara, so seeing such an authentic representation of it in an anime now after this trip is just so cool. The amount of times that I walked out of this exact same exit at this station was a lot. It's not entirely all the same. The JR station is apparently NR station now, but we do have some billboards of real shows on display, adding to the authenticity. Also, look at this cute guy. Look at him go! So our main girl works as an illustrator at the Bishoujo game company, and she proclaims that she is downright passionate about Bishoujo games and Bishoujo in general. Just for the record, Bishoujo more or less translates to beautiful girl, and a Bishoujo game is typically just a dating sim with a heavy focus on the girls being attractive. Which might get you to wonder how someone could be so passionate about such a sleazy product. Or maybe that's just me. I mean, porn always has its time and place, I suppose, but I've never really considered myself passionate about pornography. But I guess to each their own. Anyway, she complains about not getting to draw the beautiful girls that she wants to draw, and she is instead stuck on coloring in the backs of male characters. Lady, I'd love to swap places with you. At least you're getting paid to illustrate. You could do so much worse. This show is obviously kinda total bullshit. No cute girl like this would ever be this kind of a degenerate otaku. She's basically me, except that she's cute. And a girl. The amount of time that I spend just scrolling for artwork on Twitter or Galburu is higher than I'd like to admit, so I can big relate to this. Though I guess we're not completely the same, as I've never really been into eroge or bishoujo games. I've played a few, but it's never been something that I've tried to follow or keep up with, unlike anime and such. It's kinda wild how the premise of the show bashes the fact that anime and gacha games draw attention away from bishoujo games and then have the main character scorn at posters of real products, like Magia Record or Fate Grand Order. The new project that main girl's company is set to work on is one that doesn't appeal to her, so she suggests her own idea. Her own idea honestly sounds like utter shit. I'd drop whatever it is she rambles about in an instant, but the retort from her boss and this whole exchange in general is hella funny to me. The voice actor for the boss goes hard here. Later on, main girl gets asked to explain what kind of game Kanon is, and goes straight to pointing out that Ayu goes I think I might kind of slightly love this show. Seeing cute girls really cheers me up. You and me both, girl. She goes on a big speech about how bishoujo games are where cute girls can really come alive, and I just don't get why it would need to exclusively be a bishoujo game. I'd say a character is much more likely to have a wider range of emotions and expressions in a more proper 3D rendered game, with a well animated 3D model, rather than just 2D illustrations that fade between each other. Why would anyone pay full price for a skimpy visual novel when they can just go and buy Baldur's Gate 3? The only benefit that I can see with the visual novel option is that the girls will be cute anime girls, which certainly would be a plus over Baldur's Gate 3. Don't get me wrong, Lae'zel is a total bomb, but she's still far off from the heights that cute anime girls can reach. Anyway, this whole exchange between main girl and this old lady is super cute and adorable. I think it's great. Koga Aoi is killing it here, and the old lady compliments her in a great way. This Miss Donut store is probably meant to be a gag on the store Mr. Donut that exists in Akihabara, and I've actually eaten there. I was sitting over in the corner over there, and I just can't get over how cool it is to have personal experience with locations depicted in anime. Anyway, main girl finds a package from the old lady that teleports her to the 90s, placing her in the era where her ambitions for making a bishoujo game is much more likely to be realized. Good for her. The episode ends with her bumping into some game dev dude and seeing her workplace changed. I fucking loved this episode. It probably won't end up as being some deep or profound story, but it ticks all the right boxes to be a charming, fun, endearing, and downright nostalgic story. Main girl is great, and the setting could probably not be much better than this for me. Even just simple things like the text being pixelated in a gamey way in the credits make me all giddy. Super excited to see where this goes. Sousou no Frieren, Episode 2. A good amount of time passes in this episode, which seems to be a recurring theme for this series. Several years can pass by in the span of just a few minutes, which does a good job of establishing just how trivial the length of a year is to Frieren. I can't help but feel that a lot of the more important moments in establishing the relationship between Frieren and Fern must be lost, however, as this episode just glances over several years of them doing stuff together and Fern growing up. Their relationship even after this time skip doesn't really seem like one that has been developing for years, which is good in the sense that the viewer won't have missed out on any important details of their history, but it's strange in the sense that they seem much more distant than one would think after several years together. I'm assuming that Fern is just a normal human with a lifespan that is more similar to ours, which should mean that her interpretation of time isn't as macroscopic as Frieren's. I can understand that these 4 years mean very little to Frieren in the grand scope of her lifespan, but I feel that they probably should have meant more to Fern than it seems that they have. Both Frieren and Fern are both working towards accomplishing their goals before Haiter passes away. Frieren is deciphering this supposed grimoire of immortality, and Fern is trying to train her magic to the point where she can blast a hole in a rock, proving that she is ready to manage on her own without Haiter, as a way to repay him for having saved her from a dark place. They both just barely manage to accomplish their goals before Haiter ends up in critical condition, and it is then revealed that this grimoire was never expected to contain any spells that would allow for an extended life. Haiter just pulled a big brain move to get Frieren to stick around until Fern was a competent enough mage to not be a hindrance to Frieren, so that Frieren wouldn't have any excuse to not bring her along. I found this to be a pretty charming way of doing things. It was cute that Haiter had planned for a roundabout solution to getting Frieren to take care of Fern, as he knew her well enough to know what needed to be done and to get her to come around. Haiter then passes away and the duo depart on their journey together. Fern is relieved that she managed to repay her debt before his time was out, and Haiter can move on peacefully knowing that she is in good hands. As Frieren and Fern travel, it is told that Frieren has a hobby of collecting spells. It is later implied that Himmel had once complimented her for this, which makes it seem like she might be sticking with this specifically because she wants to do it as something to remember him by, which is a really sweet thought even if this is never plainly stated. It is also said that Frieren used to live more apathetically, which has the cute implication that her time with her party of heroes made her open up more emotionally, which is an especially cruel prospect considering the fact that they are now passing away around her. As they are searching for the flowers to conjure by Himmel's statue, several months pass, and we get a really adorable montage where we get to see Frieren being a very relatable and lazy bum. This is basically me every morning. Frieren is understandably bothered by the fact that such a large amount of time is being spent searching for something so trivial and tries to reach a compromise with Frieren. This bit of dialogue feels very natural and believable, and makes both characters feel particularly real. It becomes easy to understand why Frieren would be reluctant to travel with others, when she then can no longer freely devote the time she pleases to her various pursuits. 6 months might be no time at all to spend searching for a flower to Frieren, but naturally it is a concerning amount of time for any human. As they are having this conversation, however, some animal runs along that leads them right to the flowers. This feels just a little bit too convenient, but I guess I don't really mind it. So they find the flowers, conjure them by the statue, and all is well. This show has been quite thought-provoking to me in regards to the value of time. I'm eager to see where it is going from here. Undead Unluck Episode 1. Alright, I'm 5 minutes into this episode and I'm totally sold. This is just so damn charming and fun. This undead dude has such a great outlook on the situation, and it blends in a fantastic way with the main girl. Stories like these aren't exactly a new concept. There's plenty of shows where the main characters are withdrawn out of concern for the harm that they do to others, only for someone to show up who gives no shits about this and wants to be with them anyway. But this is certainly one of the best representations of this premise that I've seen so far. This is truly, properly anime. Insane over-the-top characters doing crazy shit together. Imagine being crushed by a box of bananas because you grabbed a girl's tits, only to respond to this by casually eating some of these bananas. Holy shit, main girl is cute. Look at this hair, man. Well, I'm sad now. But whatever, I guess this is fine. Some bad dudes show up and shit goes off the damn rails in the best kind of way. Main girl kisses main dude and a damn meteorite strikes the building. The animation actually keeps up with the ambitious events and creates a really explosive and creative visual result. It's goddamn brilliant. So if anyone is listening to this but haven't seen this episode, the general premise is that the main girl causes unluck to anyone who she touches directly in skin-to-skin contact. The degree of bad luck varies on certain factors, but kisses are apparently particularly effective. And our main guy is an undead dude who has been wanting to find a way to die, and naturally sees an opportunity in main girl. But even taking a meteorite to the face after getting a smooch on the cheek was not enough. Is intercourse going to be the solution to his long life in the end? What a wild fucking way to go. I had a dumb grin on my face for almost this entire episode. I can't wait to see where things go from here. Hikikomori Kyuketsuki no Monmon, Episode 1. Whoa, they are really flaunting this lady's character design for us here. They sure know how to hook a fucking dork like me. For a big part of the episode though, I disregarded main girl's absolutely wonderful character design, as I did not want to get invested in a crappy show just on account of a single cute girl. But I utterly and totally failed on that front. Main girl is mega cute, super expressive, well voice acted, and just all around one of the most endearing and fun characters of this entire fall season for me so far. I really did think this was just going to be some random trite LN trash again, but Terakomari has an undeniable charm that must have been crafted with a certain degree of effort and care. I think her dynamic with her maid also works well, even though it is a pretty typical and often used idea. As nice as originality can be, just getting a tried and true formula presented in a good way is still plenty worthwhile. In a lot of ways, this shit right here is basically a large part of what anime is all about for me. Cute girls being cute. The actual story or whatever isn't really worthy of much note. The show itself clearly doesn't care too much either. But at the very least I can say that nothing pissed me off or bored me. I was kept entertained all the way until the end. I could see this getting stale after a few episodes, but for now I'll totally watch more of this. Oh, what the fuck? Flipside is doing the OP? It's been years since I last saw them do an anime song. That's hella hype. Bokura no Ame-iro Protocol, Episode 1. Man, what in the hell did I just start watching? I actually can't believe what I'm seeing. This might be the most amateurish product I've ever find myself watching via the anime medium. What in the crap? It looks like some primitive prototype version of a PS2 game or some shit. Do you see these textures? The aliasing in the floor, man, what is the story behind the creating of this show? Alright, when the episode cuts away from the game world, it ends up looking like a more typical anime series. I thought that initial look would be the whole show for a second, but I really don't understand how that first segment was ever approved. They should have just showed a 2D scene of the character sitting by his TV with some generic white light on the screen. It would be lazy, but it would be nowhere near this laughably absurd. But I guess if they did that, I wouldn't get to appreciate this fascinating decision. So it's an anime about video games, and for once we're actually looking at desktop PC gaming and not some damn phone games. In a way, I kind of want to commend their ambition for the game visuals, because it does look like they might have actually made some sort of simple prototype of a game to use for these scenes. If this wouldn't look as bad as it does, this would have been the most authentic representation of them actually playing a video game. But as it is, it sure does look less than stellar. This idea of theirs was likely a bit overambitious for this project. Also, hold the goddamn phone, what are we looking at here? It's actually a GPU. You're telling me an anime knows what a GPU is? I never thought I'd see the day where an anime would try to depict actual desktop PC hardware. This is actually wild. The chip even says Nvidia on it. Did they actually license their brand to use it here, or does Nvidia have no clue about this? Probably the latter, right? 3 8-pin connectors, this has to be a high-end card. Shame if it's busted since it's cooking it. For the record, this is actually a known cure of sorts for dead GPUs. Sometimes the solder joints on the GPU chip can lose their hold on the PCB, which can cause bad contact to the processor. This can make the card display artifacts or flat out not function. Reflowing the solder is a way to fix this, but in my experience it's usually just a temporary solution. I've tried it myself twice before on a GTX 460 and a GTX 560 Ti. It does seem like the show also acknowledges this, which is very impressive. This benchmark uses the same UI as the Final Fantasy XV benchmark. That's cute. Some actual research into PC hardware has clearly been made here. Either that or someone with some first-hand experience has had a hand in writing this show. Main dude seems to be getting some PTSD while playing his game for some reason, and his reaction to this is pulling the display cable out? That's kind of weird. You'd think alt-tabbing would be an easier way of getting out, or even just force shutting down the PC. Pulling out the display cable seems real odd. Also, this GPU has 4 HDMI ports. I'm pretty sure no consumer card has that, but I guess this is an anime. Have I even talked about what happens in this episode yet? The actual substance of this show is completely whatever, it's barely comprehensible, and I didn't really care about it at all. But I am slightly tempted to watch more of this just to see some more PC stuff in anime, so I might be sticking with this for a few more episodes.
Kanojo mo Kanojo, Season 2, Episode 1. The first season of this show was a tasteless and silly series about polygamy, but for one reason or another, I ended up finding it pretty funny. There was an appropriate amount of chaos and cute moments that mixed pretty well with the dense main guy. I did feel that the show started going downhill when Hoshisaki Rika became involved, however, as she was just way too loud and obnoxious for me to appreciate, to the point where it just became annoying. This is a big bummer because I do quite like her design. There isn't really anything that beats a girl with twin tails, so it's a shame she ended up being such an unlikable character for me. This season picks up right where the last one left off, getting right into a bunch of messed up antics. I find it a shame that the show had to expand on the original premise, because I felt that the start of this series was just reasonable enough to accept. A dude being in a relationship with 2 girls is hella odd, but it's just one more than the norm, eh? But for 3 or 4 girls to now chase after him just makes shit get way too cluttered, and it is really straining the suspension of disbelief. For 2 girls to both love this doofus, I guess that's fine, but beyond that is pushing it way too far. He's just not that cool. If this guy was some top tier S-rank dude like Araragi, then I could get behind it a bit more, but as it stands, he isn't. The dynamic that the 3 starting characters had was totally fine. It was funny and the overall balance felt reasonable, but shit is really going off the rails in an annoying manner. So I feel like I'm a bit on the fence in regards to watching more of this. I think I'll stick with it for a few more episodes and see where things go.
Migi Todali, Episode 1. As soon as the old couple appeared on screen, the visual style for this show started to remind me of Monster, and I wonder if this was at all an intentional decision, because just a few minutes later this discount Johan Liebert shows up. The old folks are looking for a kid to adopt, and Johan wins them over, and then the opening plays. And this opening is a bit of an odd one. It is filled to the brim with the main kid, or kids I should say, being in a bunch of strange situations. Especially their facial expression look really off to me in a lot of cuts, but maybe this is intentional in order to make them seem ominous. I honestly can't even tell, it just looks goofy most of the time. And just what in the crap is going on with this face? The dude takes his face off like a mask 4 times here, and in 3 out of the 4 cases, his expression is basically the same underneath. But in one of them he looks like someone just kicked him in the nuts. I could see the idea behind him having 4 different expressions displayed here to communicate his ability to act out different expressions at will. But instead, his face is the same 3 times and then completely bizarre once. This same kind of strange tone is present for much of this episode, and it almost makes the show seem like it's trying to be some kind of a comedy at the side of its main theme. The thing that my anime list has listed for the genre here is mystery, which I suppose would seem quite right given all the absurd things that happen as the episode goes on. Shortly after our main kid arrives at his new home, it is revealed that he has a twin that looks identical to him. Towards the end of the episode we get to see that the old couple is only looking for a single child to adopt, and so the twins hatched this big brain plan to pretend to be just one, even taking the name Hitori upon themselves to make this abundantly clear I suppose. So that is the main premise of the show. A pair of twins living out their lives pretending to be just one kid to their caretakers, splitting a bunch of their responsibilities and privileges, such as food or learning stuff or helping massage this old dude's back I guess? I guess the mystery that viewers are meant to wonder about is what the background for these kids is, but I'm much more confused by what this contortionist maneuver they did at the dinner table was all about. I mean, surely they could swap places just fine without doing this elaborate circus act. The old folks would have to be looking away regardless. Was this really a meaningfully faster way of doing this? Mysterious, for sure. For a lot of the episode, both kids will be present in the same frame, even when their caretakers are around, having one of them just hide behind a piece of furniture or something, which seems like a needless risk to take most of the time, and like a very primitive way of going about this master plan of theirs. Looks a lot more silly to me than it looks devious or sneaky, but maybe that's just me? I'm assuming they have some sort of end goal that goes beyond just getting to have a home with some foster parents, given their secret planning sessions and all. But so far, the steps they have taken towards these goals have been making pies and putting birdhouses in trees, all with very primitive plans associated with them, that are yet portrayed as being some evil genius master idea by the show. Is there going to be some sort of reveal at some point that these kids are some evil hellspawn that will murder everyone, or is their evil plan and end goal just getting to live out a normal life? I could see the show going either way really, but honestly neither really appeals to me. It's all a bit too goofy and I kind of hate the design of the main kids, and how their fake friendly voice sounds. Hearing the old lady saying "shit" was funny, and I am slightly tempted to see how making a pie will further the children's master plan, but I really don't think it will be anything that is ultimately going to be worth my time, so I'll be putting this show down for now. Kimi no koto ga dai daisuki no hyakunin no kanojo, or Hyakano. Episode 1. So here we have a harem show, and an extremely overt one at that. I almost always come to dislike harem shows if they played their premise too straight, but this show was basically the furthest thing from that. This is possibly the most over-the-top representation of this concept that I've seen, and it would seem it is built this way for the sake of its comedy rather than the actual harem aspect. The commitment that this episode had to its comedy was significant, and almost every absurd scene made a certain amount of sense when viewed through the lens of comedy rather than reason. The show itself acknowledges the fact that it is utterly messed up, and at least for me, this does alleviate a lot of the disgust that I typically feel in harem works. I am still a bit annoyed by how the 2 main girls so far have basically no free will or sentient thoughts. They're just puppets that have no objectives or desires other than to be with the main dude. But I did still end up enjoying a decent chunk of the comedic gags that the show would pull almost every minute. This shrine god breaks the 4th wall to explain that some of his lines from the manga had to be cut due to time constraints. This isn't particularly clever or creative, but I think I might be somewhat partial to this self-awareness. I don't usually like male leads in romance shows that are too damn straight-laced and overreact to even the slightest hints of indecency. You don't owe someone your life, or really anything at all, just because you bumped into them. Chill. But this is another thing where this reaction is likely present in service of comedy rather than for the character to be relatable. It is in some ways an interesting trade-off, because the episode more or less sacrifices any value its characters may have on their own in favor of making them vehicles for absurd gag routines. They are all completely one-dimensional so far, with only the most bare-bones level of archetypes that denotes their speech patterns. This tsundere girl is more or less the most basic representation of the tsundere character type that you can make. Most writers use archetypes as a starting point that they then develop upon or alter to fit their visions, thus making them their own thing. But this show basically just loaded in some ready-to-go templates and called it a day. But I don't know if proper personalities would really have their place in the context of this series. I personally love tsundere girls, so I'm totally sold on Tsun Girl either way. I am so easy for this fucking shit. It somehow takes until almost half the episode has passed before main guy picks up on Tsun Girl being a tsundere. Not very quick on the uptake, are you? Towards the later part of the episode, main guy has to choose between the two main girls who has confessed to him, and naturally, he reached the brilliant conclusion of just choosing them both. I guess this is Kanojo mo Kanojo now, which is interesting considering that show is also airing this same season. At one point, main guy is bothered by how difficult it is to choose between the girls, saying that they're both so attractive. So their looks are the only important part? And obviously Tsun Girl is miles hotter than the other one, are you mad? I had a pretty good time with this episode, but even with everything in mind, it does rub me the wrong way a bit how every girl is basically just a zombie that has no purpose or presence other than to like the main guy. They will all likely have different speech patterns or body types to try to appeal to as many viewer preferences as possible, but this isn't really having a personality. I guess we'll see what happens. I'll stick with this for now. Also, the ED was pretty cute and cozy. Shy, Episode 1. This is a superhero show with a shy girl as her main character. It's one of those odd combinations that I guess is meant to make the viewer question why they chose this profession, only to then reveal that they're simply just that passionate about helping people, in spite of their disinterest or inability to be in the spotlight. As someone who has myself been shy to the point of utter social incompetence, this is a character trait that I often find myself being annoyed at when it is depicted in media, as it is quite rare to see a realistic representation of this behavior. This isn't really an exception, but this show at least doesn't try to make her social anxiety into a dramatic or sentimental plot point, which makes this a far lesser problem for me, if one at all. Rather, this character trait is more played up for comedic effect in a cartoony way, and this I don't mind at all. I could even go so far as to call it kinda cute. Her outfit isn't half bad either, far better than just about anything you'd see in a certain more popular hero show, I'd say. This episode starts off with our main girl talking on a stage and not having a great time, and then having to save some people from a roller coaster that is malfunctioning. This goes swimmingly, with the exception of one passenger who ends up getting hurt. This is apparently received incredibly poorly by the populace, and sends our main girl into shunning herself away for a month due to the backlash. This feels really arbitrary to me, and I find this to be an oddly common thing in anime where someone does something just shy of perfectly and yet gets totally trashed for it. She still saved probably over a dozen people who didn't sustain any injuries at all, and this one lady who got unlucky only ended up hospitalized and not dead. I'd personally consider this to be an excellent statistic that I'd call worthy of praise, but what do I know, I guess. I suppose the show just needed a dramatic backlash to further the story beats that they were going for, but this backlash seems so unwarranted and difficult to relate with considering the fact that so little went wrong. It would have made more sense for her to just completely mess up and not manage to save anyone at all if they needed her to face this kind of a punishment for it, but I guess this would conflict with how they wanted to portray her character. Either way, the solution they came up with to keep both of their visions intact just makes the people seem unrealistically dumb. If anything, the roller coaster technician or the park safety staff should be the ones facing the consequences for this, not the person who tried her best to save the people from their mistakes. But now I'm just reading way too far into some silly cartoon that just needs to get its story moving. Have I mentioned that main girl has a Pokemon with her that is voiced by Tomokazu Sugita? Because that's pretty cool. This dude never gets old. While main girl is sulking, some Russian hero lady just teleports in and tells her the obvious, that you can't save everyone, etc. And naturally, this Russian hero speaks perfect Japanese. Main girl then goes to rent a movie where people in the store talks about how her hero persona Shy is gone or maybe dead, and they comment that this would mean Japan wouldn't have a hero anymore. I might have missed some important plot point earlier, but does all of Japan only have a single hero? Do all countries only have a single hero each? That's perhaps interesting. Do heroes not choose their professions then? Are these superpowers so uncommon that they more or less bind their users to the role of a hero? Must be quite a heavy workload to carry an entire country's worth of emergencies on your back. Later into the episode, our main girl comes across a burning building and gets over her fear of failure by being spurred on by the need to save the people in there. Great success, good for her. Also, the Russian lady comes back and warps her up into space so that she can talk to the boss of heroes or something, and she warns of some ominous event coming up or whatever. We then see that the wounded girl from the roller coaster is joining main girl's class at school. This roller coaster girl is voiced by Toyama Now, who has a super adorbs voice. I'm a big fan of this. Also, this is the end of the episode. I found this to be a pretty unremarkable episode, but I felt that main girl was cute enough and at least not unlikable, and I thought the visuals were surprisingly strong. Especially in the burning building segment, they go way harder than they need to, and I appreciate that. The show will unlikely be anything all that special, but the cast seems to mainly consist of cute girls, and the show is set in a supernatural Japan, so I'm kinda into it just by default. I think I'll watch at least a few more episodes to see where things go. There were neither an OP or ED in this episode, so I'm curious to see what they are going to be like. It looks like Mindarin is doing the opening, which could be alright. They've made some decent songs before. I like the OP they did for Slime Isekai a fair bit actually. Kamona Hashiron no Kindan Sueri, Episode 1. This is a detective show featuring a duo of a pure and simple guy and a giga-brained, overpowered Fuyukomori who has a supernatural ability that hypnotizes people to kill themselves, but only outside of his control. This show was actually a whole lot of fun. I had a great time with this first episode. The interactions between the two main characters is mostly predictable, but this doesn't really matter if the delivery is good enough, and I certainly think that it is. Seeing the mega detective just loaf around on the floor and reeling while our normie friend is just confused about what's going on is charming. Just my kind of comedy. If you're looking for a proper detective story, this probably ain't it though. There isn't really a consistent set of rules present for how the case works or what clues are relevant to solving it. It all just hinges on the mega detective cheating by virtue of being the main character. But since this show seems to focus more on its comedy aspect, I think this is totally fine, or rather, this even adds to the comedic experience. I'd prefer more cute girls in the cast, but I guess this will do for the time being. I could see this get stale if the show doesn't meaningfully expand on this premise in future episodes, but for now I'll totally watch more of it. Also, Hikasa Yoko has a role in this show, which is a big deal even if it is just a supporting role. Atarashi Yoshi wa do tennen, Episode 1. This was a reasonably cute episode about a dude and his new boss being wholesome. The tone is very light-hearted and there isn't really any conflict here, it seems to be more of a relaxing kind of deal. I wondered for a while if this was going to be some sort of a male romance show, as some of their interactions are oddly intimate, but my anime list has no such indication on their page for this series, so I guess I don't really know. Either way, while I thought this episode was totally fine, it isn't really something that appeals to me, so I'll be leaving it here. Kikansha no Maho wa Tokubetsu desu, Episode 1. This was a thoroughly generic and boring fantasy action episode. The visuals are ugly, the character designs look bad, the systems of the school are stupid and the characters are painfully vapid. The show starts with some dudes killing a bad guy and then he self-destructs, so the good guys also die. But main guy gets time leaped back so that he can prevent it from happening again, but it's also plain and uninteresting. Not watching any more of this. Buta no liver wa Kanetsushiro, Episode 1. Man, snoozefest. This is another show that I just don't see as having anything at all going for it. If you like pigs, then maybe this would push your buttons, but otherwise I got no clue why anyone would be into this. It's mostly utterly unremarkable, just the same crap you've seen likely dozens of times before. But I will say that the rules and the systems behind how the mind reading between the pig and the main girl works is utterly absurd, and so arbitrary and stupidly convenient that it is actually just laughable. They needed for a way to have these two communicate without having their every thought known, so they basically just said, "Nah, we don't need a justification for how this works, just roll with it." Sure made me laugh, but not for the right reasons. I guess main girl is cute visually, but nowhere near enough to salvage the train wreck that is the rest of the show. She also has the incredibly annoying personality of just giving no shits about herself and gladly appealing to every unreasonable or creepy whim of the main character, which makes her seem like she's more of a tool to be used than an actual person. I'll be staying away from this one. Portion danomide ikinobimasu, Episode 1. I think I kind of got lost along the way somewhere, but I think this is a isekai where the main character actually just downright chooses to get isekai'd. She even says goodbye to her family and stuff before going. I guess that's kinda new. Toyama Nao's performance as this angel lady was moderately cute, but aside from that I was basically asleep. It's just another one of these isekai things where the main character doesn't actually fight or anything, but rather acts as a sort of utility character. There's no expressiveness or personality here, it's just completely whatever. Next show, please. Tear Moon Teikoku Monogatari Dan Todai kara hajimaru Hime no Tensei Gakuten Story Episode 1. This was a competent enough episode, but it was dull and lacked personality. This is sort of another one of these Hamefura variations, but not exactly, I guess. A lady faces the death sentence, but gets time leaped back 8 years to give her a chance to alter the course of her life so that she won't face that death sentence again after 8 years. It's all fine enough. Visuals are decent and the voice actors are fair. The main character is voiced by Uesaka Sumire, who I am especially partial to, but none of the dialogue was any fun or endearing to me, the characters didn't really stick out in any way, and the setting is just any other of these girly castle kind of settings. I'll be skipping this one. Bullbuster, Episode 1. Miki Shinichiro voices a main character in this show, and that makes me sad, because I don't want to watch any more of it. I love these voice actors' performances, so it feels like a waste to let one slip by, but I can't put myself through more of this. It's not worth it. All the characters are either completely flat or just plain annoying. This episode spent several minutes having the characters bicker over paperwork, which didn't accomplish anything other than to drag out the length of the episode. I guess they really had to fill out that 24-minute slot somehow, huh? First episodes are so crucial. Spending such a large amount of time on something so inconsequential and boring is not how you do it. This seems to be a mecha show of sorts, but the robot looks more like a piece of construction machinery. But maybe that's the point? There's some fighting towards the end against some really ugly CGI creatures. In a way, I don't really want to disparage the efforts of the animators, as I'm sure they had some pretty difficult constraints to work with in regards to budget and time. This is a low-profile show with a limited audience, but I feel like maybe it's sometimes better to not make anything at all if the only other option is to make something half-assed. Either way, I'm done with this show. Wait, Suzuki Konomi is doing the ED. Shit, it's been a while since I last heard that name. I used to really like her stuff, and this song is also pretty neat, but I'm still outta here. Konjaku hakisareta Reijo wo hirotta origa ikenai koto wo oshiekomu. Or Ikenai kyo. Episode 1. Uh-oh. Do you know what this is? It's a fantasy light novel adaptation. Oh joy. For what it's worth, this isn't actually too bad. It certainly isn't for me, but you could do a lot worse than to watch this show. Main girl gets thrown out of some marriage and is sent running through the woods, only to be found by some hermit who takes her in and is nice to her. The episode then proceeds to be a fairly unremarkable romantic comedy, where these two characters just talk and eat and stuff. The duo is voiced by Tomokazu Sugita and Hayama Saori, two strong players in the industry, and this is undoubtedly a large part of why the dialogues are as tolerable as they are. They are still utterly vapid and boring, but at least they don't make me want to stick a fork into my eye, which is otherwise quite common with other shows like these. But the overall production is certainly quite decent, so if you're looking for an easygoing rom-com with not too much going on, then I guess this is fine. But I'll be taking my leave here. Kami Erabi, God App, Episode 1. This show is from Studio Unend, that's responsible for nothing else so far according to my anime list. That's quite interesting, a new player enters the industry. One would hope they aim to make their debut with a bang. The episode starts with a sort of narrating monologue that outright proclaims that this story is a bunch of nonsense. I guess that's a good start. I barely even know where to start with this show. It's got an awful rating on my anime list, and I suspect that is largely due to the very strange 3D animation style they got going. But it's probably also got a bit to do with how everyone is a borderline lunatic in this show, and not in a fun or compelling way, but in a strange and just kind of awkward way. There's a scene where main guy brings a girl he likes to some game room, and when he starts up the console, it immediately starts playing porn. The girl has the natural reaction of going to grab the dude's dick in response to this, which prompts main guy to furiously jack off in front of her. I think this was like some sort of involuntary thing that was beyond his control, but yeah, you know, still. I actually think this girl is kinda cute, and I honestly don't mind the weird 3D look too much. Sometimes it's kinda nice to see something break away from the mold. Many of the character designs look fucking awful, but the actual rendering isn't too bad. There's even some half-cool perspective shots here and there. Anyway, this is apparently a death game show where people kill each other to be the last person standing, and main guy is roped in along with the cute girl from earlier. The girl has a quote that I certainly identify with on a deep level. Oh yes, amen sister. I mean, she's not much better herself, but main guy is just some wimpy loser who complains and cries about everything. And not in a cool way like Shinji. Anyway, out of fucking nowhere, our main guy just goes from cowering in fear to pulling out some instant kill move on the girl so she dies. Hooray, I guess? This episode sure was one hell of a fever dream. Watch this if you're drunk or high, maybe you'll have a good time. Otherwise, you should probably stay far away, which is what I am going to be doing. Paradox Live, Episode 1. I'm certainly not the target audience for this one, but I mean, the visuals sure are something, no? Look at this lady, she's got cool clothes. I thought this was going to be another full-on 3D show, but it changes to traditional animation when the performance ends, which I guess isn't too uncommon, but the fact that the episode starts right into the performance made the expectations be set in a weird way. I have no idea what the source material is for this, my enemy list just says mixed media. I love music shows, but this just seems to be a competition thing where a bunch of groups compete in some tournament style thingy, and none of them seem the least bit interesting. The genre of music is also far from being up my alley, which isn't helping. Though I actually fucking love this girl's character design, but this one glimmer of light isn't going to carry a show with nothing else going for it. Aside from the short performance at the start and end, basically nothing fucking happens. They could probably have cut out 2/3 of this episode and still be able to comfortably fit everything that actually matters in it. This dude brings up a Pro Tools window on his tablet at some point, and Jesus, that's a lot of tracks. My projects end up looking more like this. Anyway, I'm not watching any more of this. Maybe I can go look up some fan art of this Anne lady, but aside from that, I'm out of here. Seijo no Maruko wa Banno desu. Second season, episode 1. I wasn't very fond of the first season of this show back when it aired in 2021, but I did finish it. I thought the world was mostly uninteresting and boring, and the main character in particular is very unremarkable and barely has a personality. She always just wants to do the right thing, and she worries needlessly much about the well-being of others, and in general is portrayed as being just this universally kind person who puts others before herself. This probably sounds great, what a good person some may say, but this isn't a very realistic representation of an actual sentient being. We as people have flaws, we have the capacity to be selfish, and we have the ability to tolerate ourselves being inadequate at times. The way a person handles their flaws and compensates for their mistakes makes up a big part of who they are. So when these aspects of someone are completely absent, they are at least to me left as seeming like an empty husk. I also wasn't enjoying the pace of the first season as it was just astonishingly slow. I guess this is kind of par for the course for this type of calm and relaxing atmosphere that they seem to be going for, but it was just way too sparse for me. And just for the record, some of my all-time favorite shows, like K-On!, are slice of life shows that have similar goals, but still manage to remain engaging and entertaining even when the pace is relaxed. This new season seems to be more of the same, as one would expect. The pace is still very slow, main girl still likes everyone and everyone likes main girl. It's a happy-go-lucky, fluffy fantasy show that just kind of coasts along. It's well produced and competently made for what it is, so I'm sure this has plenty of value for the right person, but I am not that person, so I'll be getting off the ride here. It feels like a bit of a waste to put it down since I did finish the first season, but I know I would only end up dreading having to get through these episodes every week otherwise. I watched this episode at 4 times speed, and even then it somehow managed to feel slow and uneventful. Seiken Gakuin no Mahoutsukai, Episode 1. So for this show, the themes are harem, reincarnation and school. And it is a light novel adaptation. Uh-oh. Unsurprisingly, this show has basically nothing going for it except for one thing. The girls are pretty. Especially this blonde twin-tail lady. She is so far up my alley that it isn't even funny. But I will say that I kind of hate their outfits. They look overly cluttered and some details look like they're made of plastic or something. They look like a bad cosplay. The same goes with their weapons and stuff, they just actually look like toys. And this is very often the case with these kind of light novel harem and power fantasy adaptations. Is there some rule or deeply rooted teaching that commands that all light novel outfits must follow certain visual themes? Because it is so incredibly common that they share so many design sensibilities, and the end result of this often ends up being that they all just look the same and blend together, even between different shows. I still appreciate certain core elements, like the knee socks, but for the most part they just look awkward. I much prefer a more typical style of casual streetwear, but I guess this is a subjective preference. Twin-tailed girl would look great in some more modern and sharp fashion. As for the show itself, there isn't really much to say, it's just your typical drivel. It's a harem show, so it doesn't exactly exist for a story or anything. We're here to see main guy bump into girls and walk in on them in indecent situations. I've had more than enough of this over the years already, so I'll be leaving this show behind. If I was still a young horny virgin, then maybe I would put myself through this show just to see some more of the hot girls, but that ain't happening this time. Toaru Ossan no VR MMO Katsudoki, Episode 1. So here we got another show about a VR game. Let's see if this will stand a chance against Shangri-La Frontier that is also airing this season. The episode starts with the main character deliberately making a bad character by choosing skills that are the least useful. I didn't really understand why he was doing this in particular, but self-imposed difficulty is certainly commendable. Props for not being a meta-slave. But then as soon as he gets into the game, he gets into a shallow encounter with some random dude who bullies him for having chosen bad abilities, which is just a painfully arbitrary way of communicating the power balance of this game world to the viewer, and just an incredibly unnatural and stupid bit of dialogue. Either that or just a really lazy way to present an antagonist. One would think that choosing bad abilities would mean that the player's skill is more relevant than it otherwise would be, as it would be a means of increasing the difficulty of the game. So what is he getting bullied for exactly? Wanting a higher difficulty? I'm probably giving main guy too much credit here, as it wasn't really made clear why he even decided to do a bad build. But whatever the case, I'm already zoned out 5 minutes into this episode due to this awkward bit of dialogue. As the show goes on, all of main dude's skills start to pay off as they come into high demand, which is just a really weird twist to put in this context. At the start, he clearly knew which skills were bad, as he intentionally chose them and explained their weaknesses. So how did our player conveniently only know the bad parts of them, since they clearly now have their uses? One would think this knowledge would come along with all the other things he knew about them, but whatever, I guess. It's basically pulling that thing that happens all the time in isekai shows where the main character is cursed with having some shitty skill or ability that makes him have some unfair disadvantage, only to then become overpowered in some surprise manner due to that very skill. Except in this case, our player intentionally chose to make a bad character for reasons that were never explained. So it isn't really like he is getting some deserved good fortune or anything. What was the point of any of this? The rest of the episode was just whatever anyway. Most of it consists of main guy just explaining the mechanics of the game in a flat and boring manner. He has no personality and nor does any other character, and the game world has no unique qualities to it that separates it from any other show of this kind. I'm done with this one. Under Ninja, Episode 1. I'm a minute into the episode and I am in utter disbelief for what I am watching, in several different regards. Am I watching an anime or gameplay footage from some Xbox 360 game? They're talking actually legible English, most of them. What in the actual balls is going on? Look at these graphics! Listen to this dude!
Nah, it ain't a bomb. It's a sword. Look carefully.
I mean, the voice acting sure leaves a lot to be desired, but this is clearly not a native Japanese person speaking. The studio actually went out of their way to get a hold of someone who can speak English with a more native sounding tone. Usually when you see foreigners in anime who are meant to be native English speakers, it is still a Japanese voice actor doing the character, which usually ends up with them sounding very much not like a native speaker. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the Japanese English accent, but if a show is trying to convince me that a character is a native English speaker, this is perhaps not the right way to go. These dudes in this show sound like absolute goofballs, but at least I'm sold on them being English speakers. The OP song for this show is kinda groovy actually. Some girl asks this dude to grab some toilet paper without looking at her and he goes all in. What a guy. I barely have a clue as to what is fucking going on in this show, but I actually found myself strangely engaged by it. Watching our main guy just bum around with some drunk lady was way more entertaining than I would have expected. The tone is totally on point for these interactions to be absurd but in a comedic way. The dialogues feel natural and authentic, and while the characters are borderline unhinged, they were fun to watch. The show seems to be about how ninjas have infiltrated a bunch of branches of society and are carrying out undercover missions to protect people from some weird-looking ladies. I don't actually know what the premise is, but I wouldn't mind finding out a bit more about it, honestly. The visual look of this show seems to be trying to emulate some old-timey kind of anime style, and I actually kinda dig that. Feels strangely nostalgic, especially the ED has a lot of this vibe. This show doesn't have the best reception on Mal, so I went into this expecting some more utter garbage, but I had a totally decent time with this one. How in the actual fuck are we living in a world where Ragna Crimson is a 7.8, but this show is a 6.5? That is wild. I'm not convinced that I'll watch this show all the way to the end, but I'll certainly be sticking with it for now at least. Watashi no Oshi wa Akuyaku Rejo, Episode 1. It's another one of these Hamefura-style shows. There's been quite a few of these popping up ever since that show first aired. I think I remember hearing somewhere that Hamefura blew up to be pretty big over in Japan, so I guess that would be why imitators have spawned. If you don't know what I'm talking about, a show aired back in 2020 that was called Otomi Gemu no Hametsu Fragu Shikanai Akuyaku Reju ni Tensei Shite Shimatta, or Hamefura for short. The premise here was that the female lead character was transported to the world of an Otomo game where they were placed in the role of the villainess. Since then, I've seen a surprising amount of shows dabble with a very similar premise, this new one here included. Our main character here is a bit more messed up in the head than what is typical of these shows though, so I guess it does have some qualities to it that makes it unique. The basic premise here is that our main girl is in love with the villainess of her Otome game, so when she is isekai there, she starts pursuing her as a love interest. Since the villainess is a villainess though, she bullies and steps on our main girl, of which she is apparently a huge fan of, to the point where she demands that she steps on her harder even. I will say that I find it at least a bit charming and fun to see main girl counter-troll the villainess every time she tries to be a bitch by just enjoying every second of it. This dynamic ended up entertaining me way more than I would have thought. I do generally have quite the appreciation for tsunderes, so I'm likely a bit partial. But the villain lady is legit pretty damn adorbs, and her and main girl's exchanges were actually a lot of fun to me. I thought this was going to be a cynical rehash of a successful formula, but I actually felt that it had a good amount of character to it. I'll be sticking around to see where this goes for now. Shangri-La Frontier, Episode 2. People are apparently surprised that an endgame player is visiting the starting area, which doesn't really seem like anything all that noteworthy to me. I haven't actually played that many MMOs, the one that I've sunk the most hours into by far is RuneScape, and I can certainly tell you that it isn't the least bit unusual for late game players to stop by Lumbridge now and then. Even on free-to-play worlds, you're likely to run into many dudes with endgame gear strolling around in the starting area, and this isn't something that players are likely to really make any kind of comment on. But I guess this show just wanted to bring the viewers' attention to the fact that main guy's love interest is a late-game player who is in some big guild and stuff. Fair enough. Main guy kills the big snake thing and the animation is still holding up way better than I'd expect. He also gets really obsessed with the fact that he got covered in poison poop. Maybe he really liked that. He then goes and does some mining and complains about how he only made a small amount of progress in half an hour. Dude, have you played an MMO before? If you expected anything at all to happen in just 30 minutes, you're clearly off your rocker. Anyway, he gets some cool green ore and makes some new daggers, and I quite like the design of these. The show has been pretty consistent with having an appealing design sense, which applies to everything from character designs to items, which is very much not a common thing for these kinds of shows. Big props. He then goes and fights some goblins and ends up getting some rare monster spawn, and then the episode ends. This wolf thing looks pretty cool, honestly. This show remains surprisingly enjoyable, totally upending the typical quality of these full dive isekai stories. I'll likely end up watching this to the end. Yusuke Sanshi no Yonkyodai, Episode 1. So this show is about 4 brothers who have lost their parents and who now need to get by in life on their own. Most of this responsibility falls to the eldest son at age 23, who more or less becomes the parent of the household. With this as the premise, the episode plays out as a slice of life show, with the brothers doing what they can to support each other. This show left almost no impression at all with me. It's uncommon for a 24-minute episode to leave me with so few thoughts about it. The production is certainly solid all around, but I guess this is a theme that just doesn't really connect with me. I don't have any siblings myself, nor am I a parent, so maybe a lot of the more important connections that this show is trying to stir end up lost on me. Either way, I ended up finding this to be a boring and unremarkable episode. The characters don't really seem to have much chemistry, and it never really ended up feeling all that wholesome or heartwarming either. Most members of the family seem completely flat, with very predictable behavior. I'll be putting this show down here. Goblin Slayer 2, Episode 1. It feels like forever ago since the first season of Goblin Slayer aired, but I guess it has indeed been half a decade. I did finish the first season back when it aired, but I don't remember it too vividly these days. But I do recall that I wasn't all that fond of it. It felt like it placed more focus on just being visually shocking than actually having compelling characters or narratives. I did think that it was a bit comedic how Goblin Slayer Man is just this one-track mind who only wants to kill goblins over doing any other activity. Seeing that big boob lady throw herself at him only for him to give no shits at all is kinda cute, honestly. I also remember thinking this priestess girl had a pretty lovely character design, but these things alone won't carry an entire season of something. I could probably appreciate this show as a concept if it would have been a short-form OVA series or something, but it doesn't have enough of interest to me to fill out 12 episodes with worthwhile content. Yet now we have a second season as well as a movie added into the mix, and so far, this new season doesn't seem to be aiming to dramatically change the existing formula. It seems like a new character is being introduced, but it is one that betrays some of the biggest strengths that this show had going for it. Cute anime girls. Priestess girl and elf lady are plenty lovely to look at, but this nerd is the furthest thing from that. Maybe he will have some deep story-related relevance later into the season? Will this guy be the catalyst for the narrative becoming profound? Probably not. The opening song goes kinda hard in this season actually, I like it. I don't feel too inclined to watch more of this, but I am slightly curious to see what kind of messed up gory things that the show might try to pull. I'd kinda love to see this new guy get torn to pieces for example. But there's so much else airing this season that it feels a bit difficult to justify the time expense. Maybe I'll watch more of this if I end up with a time window that I can comfortably fit it into. Spy Family, Season 2. Since the first season of this show aired, it has established a large presence in the anime community, and I suppose for good reason. The premise is easy to understand and appreciate and doesn't rely on really any kind of prior knowledge or experience with the medium of anime. Mostly anyone could probably watch this show and find something to enjoy about it. In my personal experience, this usually comes at some degree of cost, however. Casting a wide net might mean catching more fish, but it might mean catching many of the wrong fish. While catching a smaller net might yield you less overall resources, it will probably give you a better proportion of what you're actually looking for specifically. What I'm trying to say is that while I do enjoy this show for what it is, it doesn't really leave a very strong overall impression, it mostly just flies past without really sticking for me. Anya is cute, but she isn't really what I'm personally looking for when I think of cute anime girls. Yoru and Lloyd are mostly one-dimensional characters too, that more or less just stick to their gimmicks. Which is all fine and good, however, not everything needs to be deep and complicated. Whatever the case, one thing that this show has never failed to deliver on is the visuals. Cloverworks have been going hella hard these past few years, and this series is certainly no exception to their prowess. Great looking backgrounds, well-rendered character designs and strong perspectives. This show looks spectacular, especially on displays with vivid color reproduction. The new OP for this new season highlights something that is a bit of a bummer about this show for me though, and that is that it seems to be trying to reference Western animation or media. This isn't exactly a new thing with this show, the setting overall is meant to be in some Eastern European country from what I've figured, and while this is fine and all, for me it is an unequivocal downgrade from Japan. A large part for why I am so involved with anime is specifically because it is Japanese. I'd much rather watch a good anime series than a good Western cartoon, so when anime tries to imitate Western media, to me it just becomes a matter of them intentionally making themselves less interesting. Anyway, this new season starts off with Yoru getting shot in the ass. How very unpleasant. She then seems understandably troubled by this, but is this really something that you can just shake off? I mean, I get that she's some kind of super lady, but did she even remove the bullet? What about lead poisoning? It's almost impressive how they managed to fill out an entire episode with this bullet in the butt premise. Yoru and Lloyd go on a date, but she can't ever sit down because her butt hurts. Sometimes the show shows a spot on her ass with some red lines to indicate where it hurts, I guess, and it seems the pain is mostly isolated to one cheek. One would perhaps think that she could just shift her weight while sitting so only one ass cheek is receiving most of the pressure, but who knows? I'm no elite assassin. The episode was plenty fun. It's nice to just have a reliably strong show to look forward to every week. Hametsu no Okoku, Episode 1. This was a boring and tasteless episode. The main guy just screams awkward garbage, and the main conflict just seems to be that the world is unjust towards magic users for no clear reason, which makes the antagonists boring and impossible to relate with. This guy is just a one-dimensional asshole who nobody will like and has no redeeming qualities. If the show simply wants the audience to dislike this guy, this is the cheapest way of accomplishing this. The episode opens with a witch traveling with main guy until they are eventually captured and the witch is publicly executed. But before this happens, the king or whatever deems it necessary to rip open her clothes and expose her breasts, for some reason. Man, this show is just embarrassing. The bad guys tout their technological prowess, but all their gear looks uninspired and downright dumb. These rifles are literally just blocks. Garbage. Episode 2. We've got the OP for the first time in this episode, and this overhead view of the road reminds me a lot of the old Burnout games on the PS2. Those were some good times. Got that Eurobeat synth doing some work too, and the vocalist is honestly going hard here. I dig this song a fair bit. I lost count of how many cuts there were of main girl in her provocative outfit. They really like to show that one, huh? When we get into the episode, we get right into the race that was about to start last time, and some dudes act surprised at how main guy is all the way up to like 50th place. As if this is so impressive that it's basically impossible. Damn, how many participants are there in this race? 1,000? 50th place doesn't sound too hot to me, but I guess I wouldn't really know. There's a conversation about some grip to weight ratio being shown that is meant to explain the disadvantage that our main dude has, but I got kinda lost in it rather quick. I didn't feel like it was much of an explanation for what the deal was, but maybe you're expected to just kinda know what they're talking about. The observers continue to talk among themselves about how unlikely it is for Kanata to set a good time, and how impressive his handling of the car is. This is one aspect where it seems the show is trying to account for viewers who know nothing, because they certainly make it abundantly clear that what he's doing is indeed remarkable. Either way, I thought this episode did a great job of maintaining the tension and keeping me engaged for what was going on in the race. It gradually increased the stakes as the episode went on, as there were certain dangers in some parts of the track, and so it managed to feel dynamic and engaging. Totally going to be watching more of this, but I do feel a bit bummed out over having not seen Initial D. I'm sure having that additional context could add some value to this experience. We even get a flashback to Initial D at one point in this episode. Koryaku Wanted, Isekai Sukuimasu, Episode 1. Man, what the fuck? Just for the record, this is actually in the show. I didn't edit this music in or anything. Wild. So, if I've understood correctly, this is a Chinese show that has been localized for Japan. I'm not too sure if it even strictly counts as anime, but it is listed on my anime list, so I guess I'm watching it. It's just another video game isekai with hardly anything going for it in regards to its concept. It's barely worth talking about. But the visuals are actually kind of remarkable. I won't go so far as to say they look great, or even good really, but I do think they look better than most 3D animated shows in the anime space. They fit quite nicely into the video game world that the show is trying to depict, and the lighting especially is so far beyond what is typical for these kind of CGI works. The environments are surprisingly detailed too. The character models are probably the weakest part of the show's visuals, which seems like a really strange scenario. One would think the character models would have a higher priority for their quality, but who knows. Sometimes the show throws in a loading screen between scenes, which actually felt pretty cute to me. The ED also has a really neat synth sound, I like it. Also, Hikasa Yoko is voicing the main character, which felt like such a waste. Toyosato Aki also has a character towards the end of this episode, so 2 members of the K-On! Squad is here. Why in this show of all shows, man? Either way, I'm not watching any more of this. It's crazy how they have grabbed such strong voice actors, and the visuals are very unique for an anime, but aside from that, it was just boring. Whew. I think that's it. Are we done? Are we finally at the end of this massive week of releases? I'm hoping that we have sifted through most of the garbage for this season now. I can't really handle another week of 40 plus episodes to watch. I just want to sit back and enjoy the good stuff now. I'm really looking forward to more of Kimizero and 16-bit Sensation. Undead Unluck was also absolutely awesome, and the Fuyukomori vampire show was also really cute and fun. Sousou no Frieren has also been very enjoyable. There's been a surprisingly large amount of great shows to choose from, so here's hoping they all keep it up. Thanks for watching my stuff, I hope you have a cool day, and see you next week perhaps.